Hello, my name is Willow Hosella, and I'm going to be discussing a brief introduction to functional behavior assessments. First, I want to start off by describing a functional behavior assessment in contrast to a functional analysis. Functional behavior assessment is when information is gathered from multiple sources and might include things like a review of records, direct observation of the student in the various settings where problem behavior may occur, or even interviews with staff, family members, or others who interact with the student. In contrast, there's a functional analysis, which is a scientific method where specific environmental variables are manipulated, generally by a board-certified behavior analyst, to see under what conditions the problem behavior occurs, essentially looking to see when the person can or cannot evoke the problem behavior under specific conditions. For today's topic, we're going to be focusing on the functional behavior assessment and not the functional analysis. These are the three steps in an FBA process. So when conducting an FBA, the first thing that you'll do is define the behavior of concern. Behavior should be defined in an observable and measurable way. That means that what the student does can be seen, can be recorded either perhaps with frequency or duration, and that several people would agree that the behavior is occurring when it is occurring. You want to avoid things like frustration, anger, resentment, disrespectful attitude. Things like that are not observable or measurable, or if they are, the actual observation may not be reliable across people. For this FBA process, we're going to focus on behaviors that are observable and measurable. Once you've defined the behavior of concern, you're going to identify anything that happens before the behavior that seems to reliably predict the behavior's occurrence. As an example, in the antecedent meaning before behavior, the student is told to do something. After being told to do something, they engage in problem behavior, and as a consequence, people tend to postpone having to follow through with the direction. In this example, the environmental antecedents that preceded the event were having demands placed on the student. So you're looking at what happens immediately before problem behavior occurs to see what might be setting the stage for the behavior to occur. Finally, you'll identify consequences that seem to maintain the behavior. This may be removal of demand, gaining access to preferred items or attention, or simply the postponement of having to complete a task that the student was initially told to do. The consequences that you're going to focus on will be those that immediately follow the problem behavior. So the three steps are to define the behavior of concern, ask yourself what happens immediately before the behavior, and finally, what happens immediately after the behavior. You can identify these variables in a number of ways. One way is to interview people who have observed the behavior or who have interacted with the student and have seen the behavior or perhaps even evoked it themselves. The second is to directly observe the student in the natural environment where problem behavior occurs and see what happens immediately before and after the behavior. You'll want to summarize this information and any data collected, and then develop one or perhaps more hypotheses identifying the function or functions of behavior. Once you've identified the function or functions of behavior, you'll use that information to develop a positive behavior support plan that will directly address the function of behavior. When we say directly address the function of behavior, we mean that you will arrange the environment to reduce motivation to engage in the problem behavior, teach a replacement behavior, and to make sure that the problem behavior does not contact improving conditions in the future. An additional aspect of the positive behavior support plan is ongoing data collection to make sure that the student's progress isn't being impeded perhaps by lack of fidelity of intervention, lack of training for staff, and to review ongoing data collected on the student's problem behavior so that you can tell whether or not the positive behavior support plan is effective or not. The goal of this process overall is to develop a hypothesis statement related to the function of the problem behavior. Problem behavior in general can be thought of any behavior that prevents instruction, any behavior that will prevent the student from appropriate social interaction, or any behavior that is dangerous either for the student's safety, for staff safety, or for the safety of any of the student's fellow students. Generally speaking, problem behavior should be thought of as a defective repertoire of behavior. Oftentimes, this means that the student has to learn to communicate some particular want or need. Reducing problem behavior is most effective when it includes teaching some replacement behavior. A replacement behavior, whenever possible, should address the function of the problem behavior. This is not always possible, but ideally, the replacement behavior will address the function of the behavior. As an example, if a student engages in problematic behavior because they want to gain the attention of an adult, they should be taught to appropriately request the attention of an adult as a replacement behavior. This, ideally, should make it easier to access the preferred item, in this case adult attention, and contacts the same reinforcement as the problem behavior. The same reinforcement means that our previous FBA steps discussed have identified the source of reinforcement the student is engaging in problem behavior to access. When we talk about functions of behavior, we are talking about reinforcement. We do not behave in a vacuum. We behave to change our immediate world. And anything that we do that results in things getting better for us, even if it's only momentarily, are likely to be repeated across time. When things get better as the result of our behavior, we are more likely to engage in that behavior in the future. That is the principle of reinforcement. If things get worse, we will do whatever we did before less often in the future. Reinforcement is any consequence that increases the future probability of behavior. Reinforcement is an improving condition. Whenever we discuss the function of behavior, what we are talking about is what reinforcement does the behavior contact? When defining the function of behavior, you're looking for the type of reinforcement. The only way to identify the type of reinforcement is to observe in the environment in which the problem behavior occurs what happens after the problem behavior. There are three types of reinforcement we will discuss right now. The first is socially mediated positive reinforcement, where good stuff is given to you by another person. This might be attention, access to a preferred item or activity, or a reaction of some kind. Negative reinforcement is still an improving circumstance. This is when non-preferred stuff is removed by other people. Non-preferred stuff might include instructions. If I give a student instructions, they engage in problem behavior, and I never follow through with having the student complete what I ask them to do, they may learn to engage in the problem behavior more often to postpone the onset of instruction. The final type of reinforcement we will discuss is automatic reinforcement. This is when the behavior produces its own reinforcement. Examples of this are things like twirling one's hair because the person enjoys the feeling of it, or scratching a mosquito bite to alleviate the itch. These are some functions in common terms on the left and some functions in technical terms on the right. The only way you'll know if the term on the left serves as reinforcement is if, as a consequence, the behavior that preceded it increases across time. When we conduct an FBA, what we are looking at is the antecedent to problem behavior, what happened immediately before the behavior. We've defined the behavior in an observable, measurable way. And finally, we are identifying the consequence that happens immediately after the behavior that is likely maintaining the behavior. Observing what happens before and after the behavior allows us to predict when it is most likely that the behavior is likely to occur. When considering the antecedent behavior consequence analysis of behavior, one of the things we also need to take into consideration is setting events. Setting events are antecedents that may make certain behavior more likely, but are not the actual cause of behavior. Some examples of setting events are things like health-related issues, not getting enough sleep, or problems at home or family issues. As an example of a setting event, I may lose my temper in traffic when I'm running late to work, but I only lose my temper if traffic is slower than I would prefer. Running late is not the cause of my problem behavior. The cause of my problem behavior, losing my temper in traffic, is the slower traffic. Running late is the setting event that makes it more likely that I will lose my temper in traffic. While knowing about setting events is an important aspect of conducting an FBA, it's important to remember that setting events do not cause problem behavior, and there's often not a lot that school staff can do about setting events. All the same, they should be taken into consideration when conducting an FBA. Looking at the ABC analysis, here are some examples of antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. Notice that the antecedents all involve observable, measurable, environmental occurrences. Something interesting is happening, a light turns red, a teacher asks a question, or an object is on a table in front of us. The behavior of the person being observed is likewise observable and measurable. They look in a direction, they say something, they press down on a pedal or reach toward the object. The consequences are the results of the behavior and are the maintaining variables that make the behavior more likely in the future. Once an FBA has been conducted and function or functions of problem behavior have been identified, the next step is for a behavior support plan to be developed. These are the three critical components of any behavior support plan. You must look at antecedent events so that you can reduce motivation to engage in problem behavior. You must teach a competing skill. And finally, you must make sure the problem behavior does not contact reinforcement. Each of these three components correlate with the antecedent behavior consequence analysis used in developing and conducting a functional behavior analysis. This document is available at the link provided below and gives a nice overview of a functional behavior assessment, how it's conducted, and what it is used for. This document, also available at the link below it, provides an overview on the process of conducting an FBA. This annotated positive behavior support plan provides a quick overview of developing the positive behavior support plan following the functional behavior assessment. Keep in mind that any positive behavior support plan must be individualized to the student that it will be used with and particular to the function or functions of behavior. This means that the intervention, the antecedent, the replacement behavior, and the consequence will all address the function or functions of problem behavior identified by the FBA. There are 6 upcoming training opportunities at the 3 patent offices. Each of these two-day trainings will cover the FBA process, designing an intervention plan, and conducting fidelity checks on that intervention plan. The dates that you see in front of you are when those are occurring for the upcoming school year. You can register for those events at the link that you see in front of you. This is found on the patent training calendar. This is the contact information for the 2 educational consultants who will be working on FBAs and training development around FBAs at the Patent Harrisburg office, Ashley Harned and myself, Willow Hosella. Thank you very much for your time.